My bestie abandoned me after I paid for her entire baby shower. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's letting me on Instagram. Met my best friend Connie, by the way, Connie is her real name, back in 2016 at a work outing. When her and I met, we vibed so much. It was like her and I were sisters. We connected quickly and we connected on a lot. We were both in toxic relationships at the time. You see, I was married to a complete asshole, and apparently so was she. As you can see, we developed a relationship based around this, so we got close really quickly. I really thought she was going to be in my life forever. And it was like that for a long time. A few years later, I left my husband, and I remarried to a man called Adam. He's the most amazing guy in the entire world, and I'm so lucky to have him. Immediately, Adam and I started trying to have a baby with no luck because there were fertility issues on my end. To say that this was devastating is an understatement. I know everyone says they want to be a mom. My dream has always been to be a mom. When we found out about my fertility issues, it was really traumatizing. But Connie was there for me the entire time, and she was super supportive. But after a while, I just stopped talking about it. It was too painful. This is around the time that Connie met her man, and I was so happy for her. They had been together a couple of months, and out of nowhere, she was pregnant. I was crushed. Although I was happy for her, I was so sad. Of course, I wanted to be supportive, so I offered to plan the baby shower. At the time, I was working 3 jobs, and Connie knew this. This is important to remember. I had been touring banquets to find the perfect one, but of course I needed it to be affordable. Put a deposit down and I worked my ass off to pay it. It gets worse. Part 2 is up. My bestie abandoned me after I paid for her entire baby shower. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's on Instagram. I was working 3 jobs to pay the baby shower. Put a deposit down on a banquet. Worked my ass off to pay the rest of it. This is when casually Connie told me that she wanted to change the day of the baby shower. Days after I already put down the deposit on the specific day she had asked for. Now she's telling me she wants to change it. At this point, I had already booked myself as much as I could at my job. I needed to pay this off. Explained to her that I was working as much as I could for the baby shower and that I was already booked that day. She said nope. She wanted me to move around my entire day, and she wanted me to move around all of my clients for that day. So I agreed to changing it. I made sure to explain to her that I would be extremely late to the baby shower, but that I would still be there. After that, we never spoke about it again. The day of the baby shower comes around, and I'm late. First thing I do is give Connie a hug. It was a super cold hug. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Connie's sister-in-law comes up to me and asks me why I'm late. I told her I had clients and that I had to stop by to see my mom. And she says, "Fuck your mom." I never met this woman, by the way. Connie said nothing. I felt so disrespected and hurt. I wanted to fight her, but because I'm a classy bitch, I didn't. Even helped clean up after the baby shower. Connie never said thank you. The only time Connie reached out was to tell me that she gave birth. Weeks later, I go to her socials only to see that she had blocked me on everything. I'm happy we're not friends anymore. I got pregnant right after that. Husband and I had the baby and we moved to another state. Now I'm pregnant for a second time. She still has me blocked. By the way, that baby shower was beautiful. Even her mom told me so. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, "Wow, you're growing into your body," or "Wow, you got great hips." He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, ew. He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, "Oh, you know how he is." So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dress so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. It's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting, and that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and moment too, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13, and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle. My boyfriend is moving in with his girl best friend and I don't trust her one bit. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for almost a year. When I met him, he already had a very big group of best friends. One of them was this girl. There's actually another girl in the group, but my boyfriend and this particular girl, let's call her Lacey. Lacey is completely obsessed with my boyfriend. I tell him all the time, but he doesn't want to listen to me. She goes out of her way to spend time with him, and she'll do girlfriend things for him. Sometimes she'll call him and say, I cooked us dinner, come over to my apartment. She even goes to his apartment and helps him do laundry. Let me go back though. When we started dating, he asked me not to be uncomfortable and that him and her were only good friends. But as soon as I saw them with each other, it was visible that she was in love with him. When he first brought me around to meet his friends, she was super territorial. She would sit next to him and even sat on his lap in front of me. And this made my boyfriend uncomfortable. He asked her to sit on a chair instead of his lap. After that, I asked him if he had feelings for her and he said no. He said he's only ever seen her as a sister, that the thought of hooking up with her makes him want to vomit. Lacey reached out to me and asked me to have lunch with her. Throughout the whole lunch, all she talked about was my boyfriend, and how amazing he is, and how only a good girl deserves him. Part 2 is up. My boyfriend is moving in with his girl best friend and I don't trust her. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. And her and I went to lunch. All she talked about was my boyfriend. That's when she started saying things like, he only deserves a really good girl. That's when I was straight up with her. I told her that he had already chosen me because he loved me. And that I didn't need her to tell me what my boyfriend needed. You guys should have seen the look on this girl's face. She was shocked that I would defend myself and even talk back to her. Then she said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I told her that I didn't feel bad and that I knew what she was doing. She was basically trying to intimidate me and make me feel that I wasn't good enough for my boyfriend. She denied it and started apologizing, but at least I made it clear to her that I was not stupid and that she was not going to walk all over me like she probably did with all of his exes. By the way, one of his past girlfriends actually broke up with her because of this girl. I mean, Lacey. Found this out through one of the other friends. They told me that I needed to be careful with her. That's why I was prepared to go to lunch with her. Guess what happened though? I called my boyfriend to say hi to him and that's when he starts yelling at me. He said Lacey called him to tell him that I had attacked her at lunch, that I basically threatened her. I explained to him what happened from my point of view, and he said that she was probably just overreacting. But it was her word against mine. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend is moving in with his girl best friend and I do not trust her. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. After Lacey told my boyfriend that I had attacked her and threatened her, he told me to keep my distance. So I did. But that meant that he would hang out with her without me. I found this completely unacceptable. That's when I told my boyfriend that she was manipulative, that she had clearly planned everything out so that he and her could be alone. Then I told him that his ex-girlfriend left him because of her. He told me that I didn't know the full story and that I should mind my own business. That's when I noticed that he wouldn't come over to my apartment every day. And guess why? His best friend Lacey told him that she had a stalker and that she needed my boyfriend to stay over her house so that she could feel protected and safe. I just can't. I told him that she was clearly manipulating him and probably lying about the stalker situation so that he could spend more time with her. And just like that, 2 days later, he told me that they were moving in together and that she miraculously found an apartment big enough for the two of them. In 2 days? I don't think so. I think she had been planning this the whole time. And my boyfriend is just stupid enough to fall for it. I told him if he moved in with her that he should just forget about me. He begged me not to leave him, so I guess I'm still his girlfriend. He's still debating whether or not to move in with her. He says he doesn't want to lose me, but he wants to be able to be there for her. I think I should break up with him, but maybe there's another solution. What do you guys think I should do? Story time about how I lost my virginity to my sister's boyfriend. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's on Instagram. Please give me a chance before you judge me. I'm 23 years old and I've never been kissed. Don't get me wrong, I have been chased by boys pretty much my whole entire life since I was a kid. But my sister and I have really strict parents. My sister is older than me, she's 25. But for some reason, my dad is way more strict with me. My sister and I are beautiful girls. My dad's always told me that I'm too pretty for my own good. When I was a teenager, I really didn't understand that. But judging by the amount of guys that are always trying to hook up with me, I understand. understand him. My mom is a little bit more lenient. She would allow my sister and I to go out on the weekends without my dad knowing. Honestly, this has caused me to be afraid of guys. Anytime a guy approaches me, no matter how cute he is, I become painfully shy. And I'm actually scared of them. I assume that they're only going to try to take advantage of me because that's all I've ever heard from my dad. Well, the plan backfired on my father because as soon as I became comfortable with a man, I lost my V card to him. And unfortunately, it was my sister's boyfriend. My sister met this guy 6 months ago. He came over to our house and begged my father to let him date my sister. And he's really hot. Part 2 is up. Story time about how I lost my virginity to my sister's boyfriend. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sent me on Instagram. That's when my sister's boyfriend begged my father to let him date my sister. Because my dad is so strict, he actually took this guy to the police station and asked the police officers if he had a record. Luckily, he was totally clean. It took a couple of weeks for my dad to accept this guy. Eventually, when my father approved of him, he started coming over to our house and obviously I was interacting a lot with him. My sister was really excited to have a boyfriend and I was really excited for her to have a boyfriend. Now it was my turn. I asked my dad if I could start dating and he said absolutely not. Mind you, I'm 23 years old and I've never even been kissed. This is where I start feeling like shit. Because my sister loves me, she started inviting me to some of her dates with her boyfriend. And I would tag along because I was bored at home. And slowly but surely, I started having a crush on her boyfriend. He was the kind of guy that I would want to date. He was extremely handsome, already had a full thriving career, went to a great school, had a great sense of humor, and was just fun to be around. I started having dreams about him, and I started thinking about him all the time. And every time he would come over to our house, I got butterflies. I was falling for him. Part 3 is up. I'm about to cheat on my husband with his dad. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sent me on Instagram. My husband is a little bit abusive, let me explain. We met 3 years ago when I was in college. Since then, he's always been really jealous and controls everything I do. After we got married, he basically told me that he didn't want me to work, so I haven't had a job for a year now. This means he wants me to be home all the time. I've managed to start doing certain things like take Pilates classes, I got into his salsa class, and I've managed to make a couple of friends near us. Now, the other bad thing is that we moved away when we got married. So I'm about 7 hours driving from my family. Because of this, I've become very close to my father-in-law. My mother and father-in-law divorced about 2 years ago. I don't get along with her because she thinks that my husband is perfect and every time I complain about him, she just gets mad. But his dad understands me. He notices how jealous and controlling my husband is, so he tells him all the time he needs to give me time and space. Well, I started falling for my father-in-law. Let me just say something. This man is so handsome. He's so successful and has it together. My husband is really handsome, but the way he controls me just turns me off to the point where I don't let him touch me. And this just makes him angrier. Part 2 is up. I'm about to cheat on my husband with his dad. Because my husband is so controlling and jealous, I became closer to my father-in-law. It's gotten to the point where I don't even let my husband touch me anymore. Anytime he comes near me, he gets so aggressive and always tries to kiss me even if I don't want him to. And every time I go to a dance class or to Pilates, he starts calling me to make sure that I'm there, even though he has my location turned on so he knows where I am at all times. And because my husband has my location all the time, he never gets suspicious when I'm at his dad's house. So my father-in-law and I have been spending a lot of time together. When my husband goes off to work, I invite him over and we start talking about his son. And I basically complain to him the whole time about how controlling and jealous he is. But every time he comes over, the sexual tension between us is so real. My father-in-law invited me to go to the gym with him, so I've been working out with him every single day. And that's made us even closer. A few nights ago, I invited him over again. And that's when I told him the truth that I was attracted to him. That's when he told me that even though we were both attracted to each other, we needed to control our feelings. But I kissed him. Part 3 is up. That's when I started making out with my father-in-law. At that point, I couldn't control myself. We had spent so much time together and bonded over his abusive son, my husband. After I kissed him, we just stared at each other. Mind you, we've only really known each other for about a year. And the whole time I've been with his son, I've always complained to him about how jealous and controlling he is. And how unsatisfied I am because I never let his son touch me. That's when he comes over and kisses me. Something almost happened when we laid down on the couch and started making out, but he stopped himself. I could see in his face how disappointed he was, but he also knows how unhappy I am to be married to his son. That's when I told him that I would get divorced from his son. Then he confessed that his son has been cheating on me for 3 weeks with one of his employees. Apparently, my husband promised him that he would leave her, but hasn't. So I proposed he and I start an affair, while my husband has his affair with his employee. I finally managed to convince him and he said yes. So we're gonna meet at a hotel this weekend. My husband said he's going on a work trip, but he told his dad that he's actually gonna be with his mistress. So I might as well, why not? Life is too short. I'm totally attracted to him, and we'll just keep it a secret. What do you guys think I should do? I told my mom her boyfriend kept trying to molest me and she won't believe me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sent me on Instagram. Once I was born, my father abandoned my mom and I. So my mom raised me on her own with the help of my grandma. My grandma decided to retire in a different state, so we didn't have her help anymore. This is when my mom started dating a new guy. He was really great. He was definitely a father figure. He took care of me and my mom, and he even had his own son, so we were about the same age. We were like the Brady Bunch. It was the happiest time in my life that I can remember. But soon my stepdad found out that my mother was cheating on him with a neighbor. He would go off to work and my brother and I would go to school. So my mom would have the neighbor come over and they would do whatever they would do. Another one of our neighbors decided to tell my stepdad the truth and he caught them. Quickly divorced my mom and abandoned me too. Because of this, my mom and I definitely have abandonment issues. But it was all my mother's fault from the beginning. She eventually met someone new when I was 16 years old. This man was not like my stepdad. He drank a lot and always invited his friends over. There were always strange grown men in my house. And my mom would constantly tell me to put on clothes before they saw me. But my mom just encouraged them to drink alcohol. Part 2 is up. I told my mom her boyfriend tried to molest me and she won't believe me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. At this point I was 16 and I was growing into my body. I was a teenager going through puberty. My mom's boyfriend would always invite his guy friends over. And anytime I came out of my room, they would make comments about my body and how quickly I was growing. Then my mom would tell me, you need to cover up before they see you. Instead of my mom protecting me and telling these men not to talk to me like that, she was telling me to cover up. So I did. Around my stepdad and his friends, I started wearing really big t-shirts. This led me to become ashamed of the curves that I was growing into. I would even layer sports bras just to flatten my chest. That's around the time my mom's boyfriend started acting strange. Anytime I was in the bathroom, he would always make up excuses as to why he had to come in. And this man would pee in front of me. Even if I was brushing my teeth or taking a shower, he would always try to come in. I obviously started locking my door and I told my mom that I didn't want him to come in when I was in the bathroom. And she would say things like, this is his house. But he didn't pay rent. My mom was the one paying the rent. Oh yeah, and anytime I had my period, he always wanted to know certain details, like how much I bled. But it gets worse. Part 3 is up. I told my mom her boyfriend tried to molest me and she won't believe me. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. Whenever he would start asking me questions about my period, I would automatically shut off. This is around the time where I got my first boyfriend. This is when I made the mistake of telling my mom the truth. She wanted me to invite my new boyfriend over and all she did was strut around in a tube top and shorts. And she kept saying things to him like, wow, you look so big for your age. She completely embarrassed me and my boyfriend actually felt so uncomfortable he went home. After that, my stepdad kept paying more and more attention to me. Anytime I was in my bedroom, he would always look for excuses to come in. Would knock on my door, and he'd pretend like he wouldn't hear me say don't come in. And he would come in anyway whenever I was changing. Didn't have a lock on my door, so my boyfriend helped me install it. And when my mom's boyfriend found out, he threatened to beat up my boyfriend. One night he came into my bedroom and tried to touch me. I yelled at the top of my lungs and my mom came in. This woman pretended like nothing had happened. The next day she told me that I was just dreaming. Then she told me that I was just trying to provoke him. I actually ended up moving in with my boyfriend and we got married. Bye, toxic mom. My grandma walked in on me and my cousin doing it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. My grandmother is a 97-year-old woman. She survived the war. As a teenager, she worked in a factory. This woman is made of steel. Well, my 19-year-old cousin who I hadn't seen in 3 years came over with his parents. And let me tell you, it was lust at first sight. By the way, I'm an only child, so I am used to getting what I want. And as soon as I saw him, I knew that I wanted him. I know, it's sick and twisted, but he's my third cousin. So I guess it really doesn't count that he's my cousin, right? So 2 months ago, my dad moved my grandma into our house. And we started planning her 97th birthday party. So my cousin and his parents started coming over more often. And every time we would see each other, we would just like stare at each other. We would flirt a little bit. I knew that he was into me just as much as I was into him. Around the 4th time they came over to our house, I asked him if he wanted to see my room. Our parents didn't suspect a thing. In my room, he asked me if he could kiss me. And I said yes. We took off our shirts and started making out. Part 2 is as I'm making out with my cousin in my bedroom, I could hear my parents calling from downstairs. We put our shirts back on and pretended like nothing happened. Like I said in part 1, we were planning my 97-year-old grandma's birthday party. So my cousin and his parents were coming around the house pretty often. And every time he would come over to my house, we would pretend that we were going to do something on my laptop upstairs. When in reality, we were just making out. One of the times they came over, my parents started getting pretty drunk. And this was great for me because he and I could just go up to my room and they wouldn't notice. So once we get up there, he starts trying to take off all my clothes. And I'm like, nope. I may make out with my cousin, but I have some self-respect, okay? And I gave in and we did a few naughty things, but I don't kiss and tell. That same weekend was my grandma's birthday party. And I pretty much knew that things were gonna go down with my cousin. He was even planning how it was gonna happen. We would wait until everyone was drunk enough downstairs to come up to my room. So that's what we did. There were so many people at our house for the birthday party. We had music, lights, and catering. So pretty much no one would notice that we were gone. We head up to my room and instantly start taking off our clothes. We're both down to our underwear and start kissing on the bed. That's when we get fully naked. Part 3 is up. My cousin and I are fully naked making out on my bed. And here is where I failed. I thought I locked my bedroom door, but I didn't. We go from making out to doing more stuff, and then more and more stuff. He's on top of me at this point, so I can't really see my door. My cousin and I are going at it. Then all I hear is my door creaking open. We stop and look over his shoulder. That's when we see our grandmother. But here's the thing. She couldn't actually open the door all the way. My hamper was right behind the door. My bed is behind the door. So at this point, he gets off of me and we're both trying to get dressed as quickly as possible. And my grandma just says, "Are you coming down to the party or not?" Then she fully opens the door. I'm halfway dressed and he is less than halfway dressed. She actually started laughing and says, "Oh, I knew you guys were up to something." Then she said, "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." My cousin and I looked at each other and didn't say a word. That's when she says, "You two better come downstairs before someone else comes up." I actually could not believe it. We end up going downstairs and have a great time with our families. Later that night, my grandma pulls me aside and says, "Life is short, so you should have fun. But try to not have too much fun with your cousin." But yeah, this didn't stop us. After the party, I ended up going to his house and we finished the job there. Am I really disgusting for this? We've been doing it every day. This is how I found out my ex was grooming my little cousin. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. At this point, I had walked in on my boyfriend with a 12-year-old girl. This little girl told me that my ex was her boyfriend. I called the cops and they came right away. A few weeks later, the cops came to our house and told us that they had found some messages on his phone and that they were from my little cousin. He had met my entire family. And of course, he had met all my little cousins. One of them being an 11-year-old girl. After the day he met her, he found her on Instagram and started sending her messages. And of course, she wrote back. She's a little girl. Why would she think anything was wrong? But side note, I was really angry at my aunt for even letting her 11-year-old daughter have an Instagram. Unchaperoned, by the way. It's not like my aunt was checking her messages or anything. My husband had decided that he wanted to meet up with her at a park. He even told her not to tell anyone or me. I'm terrified at the thought of what he would have done to her if he'd gotten her alone at the park. Like I said in part 3, he's in prison. The cops had found over 30 little girls that he was in contact with. So if you have a kid, please don't let them have Instagram. If they have their own cell phone, please check their messages. He also used Snapchat as a way to getting to kids. So don't let them have Snapchat. Luckily, my little cousin is okay. She has no idea what happened. My aunt took away her cell phone and gave her a flip phone instead. Are you the type of parent that lets their kids have social media unmonitored? Hide your kids, hide your wife, and hide your husbands. Bye. How I found out my best friend set me up to get assaulted and robbed. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I'm sending me on Instagram. Growing up, I got bullied a lot and I never had a best friend. After graduating from college, I landed a really good job. I actually started working as a forest ranger and this was my dream job. I love being outside in nature. Like I said, I don't have a lot of friends. I even had to move to a smaller town to be at this job. When I got to this small town, immediately one girl started trying to befriend me. Let's call her Katie. Katie was extremely nice to me. Like almost too nice at the beginning. She was always inviting me to go out and even introduced me to all her friends. I ended up really liking her friend group, which was so nice. A month into living there, weird things started happening. One day I woke up to a knife in my tire. Then a few days later, 2 of my packages were stolen. I decided to install a Ring camera and I told nobody. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then one night, my Ring camera notifies me that someone is outside my door. The person was wearing a black hoodie, so I couldn't see their face, but I could tell that they were a woman. Part 2 is up. How I found out my best friend set me up to get assaulted and robbed. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. That's when I see a black figure outside my door. Couldn't see exactly who they were, but I could tell it was a woman. I obviously didn't confront them because I didn't know if they had weapons. Instead, I turned on my porch light and they ran away. The next morning, I realized that they were scoping, trying to figure out how they could get in my house. I went to the police and they told me that it was probably just teenagers playing a joke on me. I decided to believe them because I couldn't imagine somebody wanting to rob me. But more weird things started happening. I have my packages stolen at least once a week, so I decided to get a P.O. box instead. Mind you, while all of this is happening, I'm still hanging out with Katie and her friends. She was always calling me her bestie, and we would do everything together. She would even come over to my house and sleep over. I truly thought that she was a good person. One night, I go out with Katie and her friends. Katie decided to get belligerently drunk. This is when she started saying things like, "We know you have money. You come from money, don't you?" I decided to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, they were all gone. Part 3 is how I found out my best friend set me up to get assaulted and robbed. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. When I come back from the bathroom, I realized they ditched me. By the way, they had given me a ride to the bar. Because there's no Uber at that time in my small town, I ended up having to hitch a ride with some random man. Next day, Katie comes over super apologetic. She even asked me if she could sleep over, so I said yes. The entire time she was at my house, she kept trying to smoke cigarettes outside, and she kept leaving the door unlocked. I finally go to bed, I check that the door is locked, and it was. Then at 2 a.m., I wake up to my Ring alarm notifying me that there's people outside. When I look, there are 4 men standing at my door, and they're yelling at me to open the door. They even said, "Be ready because we're horny." I was petrified. I instantly called the police and told them that they needed to leave, which they did. And I go looking for Katie and she's nowhere to be found. The cops came, they ended up telling me that Katie had done this to other women and that the group of men were her cousins. That's when I realized that she was the one stealing all my stuff. They were arrested, but they couldn't keep him there. How am I going to be in the same town as her? I don't think I should have to move. What should I do? This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's not on Instagram. My mom and dad had me when they were really young. My mom was 17 and my dad was 19. For some reason, my mom doesn't like talking about him, so I never really found out exactly how they broke up. All I know is that they stayed together until I was 5 years old. Something really bad happened and then my mom kicked him out of the house. Like I said, I don't even know what happened. I was 12 years old, he begged my mom to come back, and she let him live in the apartment we had. But he's pretty much a deadbeat. He didn't help my mom pay for the bills. He didn't even want to get a job. He even went as far as begging my mom to become a stripper. He said that she would make way more money than the job she had. She was a secretary at the time. When I was 15, he left our house again. I never got a bad feeling from him when he was living with us though. With a lot of hard work, my mom was able to put me through college. I graduated and I got a really good job. I bought my mom and me a house and we moved in together. Then COVID happened and I lost my job. Friends suggested I start OnlyFans and I decided to do it. I started making a lot more money than I ever thought I would. Some months I was making around $20,000. This one guy would send me $1,000 every single week. In exchange for pictures. Part 2 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's on Instagram. So this one guy started sending me $1,000 every single week. In exchange, I would send him private photos. Everything was totally fine until he started asking me questions. He would ask me things like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite dessert? Because it's OnlyFans, I never really answered honestly. But then one day he told me, you love The Little Mermaid, don't you? And I was like, what? Because The Little Mermaid was my favorite movie as a kid. Watched it at least 3 times a week when I was a kid. First I thought it was a cousin playing a joke on me, so I decided to block them. The next day, I get another message. This one says, I remember how you used to love hot dogs. That's when I really shit myself. Because my dad and I would make hot dogs every single Friday. It was our thing together. Like I said, he was a deadbeat, so he couldn't afford anything more than cheap hot dogs. And that's when he said, I have a confession. And before I could reply, he said, I'm your dad. I felt so disgusted. I blocked him and then blocked him from my cell phone too. That's when he sends me a long text message explaining why he signed up to my OnlyFans. He said that he was just trying to get to know me, that all he really wanted was to get me back as his daughter. Then why ask for nudes? Part 3 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. As soon as I read his long text message about why he signed up, I once again blocked him. 20 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. Yep, it's my fucking father. Started knocking on the door so hard my neighbors came out, called 911, and they came within a minute. I live in an area where there aren't too many people, so my house is really easy to find. Saw my dad walk to the backyard and try to get in through the back. That's when a cop stopped him and asked him what he was doing. Then he told the cop that I had invited him over. Then the cop comes to my door and asked me if I had invited him. I told him I didn't. Then I told the cop about OnlyFans. My dad was so ashamed he actually denied it. But of course I had all the receipts. Showed the cop my phone and the cop told him that he needed to leave me alone. He left my house and I didn't have the heart to tell my mom. But later that night I see another person sign up to my OnlyFans. Turns out it was my dad again. This time he was offering me $3,000 for more pictures. And he confessed that he couldn't help but love me as a woman because I didn't grow up with him. Excuse me, sir? You raised me for half of my childhood. Wanted to get a restraining order, but the judge says it's not that easy. So now I'm considering closing my OnlyFans. I don't think it's fair though. What should I do? I had caught him cheating 5 times at this point. I know what you're telling yourself, how stupid could I be to stay with a man like that? But I was just so attracted and so in love with him, I couldn't leave him. But then the worst thing happened. Decided to put him to the test. Told him I was going out of town to visit a friend and he believed me. But do you think I really did? No. I got a hotel room. Later that night, I went back to my house. Looked through the window and I see my husband sitting on our couch with what I thought was a woman. I unlocked the door and burst in furious. The woman turns back to look at me. And that's when I see a child. A 12-year-old child. I honestly didn't automatically assume anything wrong. I ask him, what is this little girl doing here? That's when the little girl looks at me and tells me he's my boyfriend. My knees began to tremble. At this point, all the memories of him and I meeting come back to me. I began to realize how he groomed me and that this little girl was there for you know what. I didn't even hesitate. Took the little girl up to my bedroom and locked the door. Called the police and they arrived fast. On his phone, they had found 14 different conversations with underage girls. One of them being my own cousin. Did I make a story time about that? Anyway, he's in jail now. This is how I found out my husband was dating an underage girl. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's on Instagram. At the time I didn't realize it, but he was grooming me. I was 16 and he was 22. The more weight I began to lose, the more affectionate he would become. Mind you, he's my trainer. Trusted everything he was doing. Like I said in part 1, I was already falling in love with him. By the time I had lost 30 pounds, I was completely head over heels for him. And at this point, he started buying me flowers and chocolates. Would find reasons to give me a gift all the time. When he asked me out to go to dinner, he said that he wanted to congratulate me for the hard work that I'd been doing. Of course, I didn't go home and tell my parents that my personal personal trainer had invited me to dinner. Went to dinner with him, and after that, we were together every single day. He asked me to be his girlfriend, and I said yes. We quickly began to do everything a boyfriend and girlfriend do. When I turned 18, we decided to tell my parents about the relationship. My parents were furious. They only knew him as my personal trainer. My dad instantly forbade the relationship, but we still ended up getting married when I was 19. That's when my personal hell began. I started catching him cheating all the time. It's like he almost didn't care that I would find out. He was always texting other girls. None of them were underage. And he always promised that he would do better, so I stayed with him. Until I found out he liked children. Part 3. Story time about how my ex-husband married my mother. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on Instagram. My husband and I divorced about a year ago. Little backstory. When my husband and I were together, we didn't really have infidelity problems. We mostly had financial problems, and we just didn't agree on having kids. I definitely did not want kids, and he wanted kids. Anyway, we ended up getting divorced after 2 years of being married. Now, when he and I were married, him and my mom always got along super well. More than your average son-in-law, mother-in-law. Of course, this always made me happy. My husband just made her laugh a lot, and they would even sometimes go and have dinners together, or just get drinks together. Exactly a year after he and I got divorced, towards the end of my marriage with my husband, he confessed to me that he is very attracted to older women. He even joked about how he might get with my mom after he divorced me. I thought it was funny, we both laughed. Well, fast forward exactly a year later. My mom invites me and my siblings over to her house for dinner. Suddenly, my ex-husband comes out of the kitchen, and they both announce that they are getting married. And then they start tonguing each other. The worst part is that a few days before, I told my mom that I was missing my ex-husband. Part 2 is up. That's when my ex-husband grabbed me and just started making out with me. I couldn't resist it. When we finally finished making out, he tells me that he's still gonna marry my mother. I asked him why, and he said that he was marrying her because she really needed him. He kept saying things like, she's a lonely woman, she's getting older, she needed someone to take care of her. Mind you, I have 4 siblings and me who literally are always there for my mother. I have never left this woman alone a day in her life. That's when I started remembering something. A few years ago, he had a friend who married an older woman, and that basically he became her sugar baby. Then I realized that around this time, he had gotten fired from his job. Then I accused him of wanting to become a sugar baby. He got so angry he left my apartment. Then I get a call from my mother. Guess what my mom says? She said that she's willing to support him because he gives her everything she needs. She even told my brothers and sisters that we could only come to her house if we are invited. My ex-husband blocked me, trying to convince my mom to block all of us. Because of this, they got into a huge fight. My ex-husband came back to me again, but I said no. What the heck should we do? Story time about how my mother is marrying my ex-husband. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on Instagram. I had just told my mom that I was missing my ex-husband and that I might text him. No wonder she didn't reply, because 2 weeks later they're announcing that they're getting married. As he's making out with my mom in front of her kids, in front of me, I get up from the table and I leave. At this point, I'm still not over my ex-husband. Yes, we both agreed to get a divorce, but the more time I spent away from him, the more I realized that maybe I did want kids, and that he was the perfect person to do it with. Well, at this point, I have nothing else. My ex is marrying my mom. Basically, everyone followed me into the kitchen. That's when I just let it rip. I told my mom that she was the worst mom in the world, and that I had told her 2 weeks before that I was missing my ex-husband. That's when my ex-husband looks at my mom and says, "Is that true?" My mom looks at him and says, "Yes, it's true." Then he turns to me and says that he's sorry, but he's no longer in love with me, and that the one he wants to be with is my mother. My siblings and I were all really upset, so we decided to leave. Once I get home, I get a text from my ex-husband asking to meet up with me. Comes over to my apartment, and as soon as he comes in, he tries to kiss me. I couldn't resist and I kissed him back. Part 3 is up.